It's a practically extinct bowed instrument with only around 54 to 56 examples of the instrument left surviving in the world. Most of them are in museums of the world, particularly in the Bavarian region, Germany, etc. They most commonly have 7 playing strings and 14 sympathetic strings, which are almost never plucked nor bowed, and I have to say almost because you bow them. But they resonate when a playing string has a close relationship to these sympathetic strings which aren't played. So if someone plays a note of D on a bowed string, if any of the sympathetic strings are tuned to D, that will resonate even though we never touch it. And that gives it a sort of inbuilt resonance, kind of sort of church-like effect, particularly for the player who's got it right next to their ear. In the violets I've measured in the museums of Europe, I see many instruments with different numbers of strings, many different outlines, copies, rich with decorations, lots of luxury, and rarely ever plain or undecorated, although there is one in Scotland which is very, very, very plain. So yeah, these are some examples. I've never seen, for the woodworkers here, I've never seen birds I've made anywhere else in the world like this. I've asked other wood dealers to have some, although you can't see from the quality of image too much here. I've asked wood dealers for it, and no one's found similar quality. So, for example, if we look at this picture, we can see a rosette just below the fingerboard in clear view. That's the circular decoration next to the fingerboard. And I think we can all agree this, though, actually looks quite plain colour. There's not really too much going on with it. But you may be wrong to assume such. If we look a little bit closer, and yeah, you might not be able to see too much with the projector. And a little bit closer still, these little flecks, it's actually gold. This was once gilded. So this instrument is 300 and something years old, and this sort of indicates that when it was first done, the whole thing would have been gold. And as you can see on my copy, I've done likewise to sort of mimic how it looked. And it's the same technique, so over time the same will happen to that. That will eventually wear down just like the original and have little flecks left. Yeah, just as the original was. And maybe you could ask if you can turn the lights off, maybe so the image quality is a little better if that's possible. Thanks. So, one example of an unusual decoration found on an instrument is on the Johann Benedict Quastner, which is what this instrument was originally based on. And yeah, anyone know what they think that might be? Anyone got any ideas? There is sort of a vague art going on in it. Any ideas? So, I asked a lot of friends this same question. 1 or 2 people in the room are just keeping it inside. Thank you. Yeah, I asked a few friends what they thought it was. There's this little heart thing, these sort of curly parts. No friends had any idea. I was at a friend's house, had the instrument, was just showing it around. The person who's a non-musician had a look at it. She happens to be a hairdresser. And she saw this curl. I thought it's the end of the hair, from the head. So yeah, you can have a closer look later if you wish. But yeah, apparently that's what it may be in There's another instrument, I don't have a photo of it here, I can show if anyone's interested in it, the whole peg box of another instrument where the end of the head has hair all the way down. It's quite beautiful. Too far too soon. So yeah, if everyone asks, oh no, I've already said that. In terms of the history, the greatest number of violets ever produced was between the 1720s and the 1730s. And there are earlier and later examples, but that's when it seemed that the production of the instrument was in its prime. However, they were still used and known. Leopold Mozart was born in 1719 and wrote the Such einen gründlichen Violinschulen. Yeah, I can't pronounce that very good. In 1755, which was published in 1756, which is the birth year of his famous son, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, which is quite a funny thing I found out recently. And Leopold defines the most well-known bowed instruments at the time in the introduction to this text, and he in fact mentions the English Violet, which is nice because there's very, very little information on it, anyway, not just online, but many other libraries, museums, etc. There's not a lot of information about it. If you write English Violet on Google Images, you will see a lot of really nice plants. Flowers. So this is what he wrote, chiefly distinguishable from the Viola Damore by having 7 strings above and 14 below, which must therefore be tuned differently. Owing to the number of lower sympathetic strings, the tone is stronger. This statement became a consideration for my instrument. I thus used some very low-pitched sympathetic strings and tuned the instrument's playing strings quite low. Violets have a longer vibrating string length than viola Damore. Viola Damore is the nearest relative of an English violet. It's a vaguely similar instrument, but quite a bit smaller and quite a few less strings. So yeah, I tuned this a fourth lower than a viola Damore, which for the guitarist is equivalent to 5 frets lower in pitch. Hence, it's actually in near enough open A chord. It's in D, but yeah, usually I tune it to around about A, but some slight adjustments for what Rachel's going to play later. So yeah, there's a lot more low end in this. The difference between a sort of a viola Damore, this singular instrument, encompassing the range between a violin and a viola. This is sort of a bit more like a viola and a cello kind of range. There's some very low pitch notes over on this. So the tone is quite a bit stronger. Bass is the frequency which moves the most amount of air, so the sympathetic sounds without ever being touched. So strings underneath, there's actually 2 tiers. If Rachel can maybe hold it sideways, you can see the bow strings above, and there's these 14 other strings, very fine ones in between. They're never played, they're never touched, but they give this reverberation as I previously mentioned. And from the instrument having a lower pitch sound in general, and bass is the frequency that moves the most amount of air around, perhaps that's contributing to more resonance and slightly louder sound. Returning back to decorations, almost all violets feature rosettes, which is that decorative mold decoration that I showed you earlier in the previous picture. Rosettes, which are covered by the fingerboard of the instrument going over the top, are highly unlikely to be original. The fantastic violin maker Shane Mackey, who a lot of you in this room probably know, first mentioned this to me, and I agree with him. The instrument maker would hardly labour upon creating a beautiful decoration such as this, only to then obscure it from view. Seems plainly obvious. And with this in mind, I inspected one of the Czech National Museum's most prized instruments, museum number E1394, the last one to say that, the 1727 Verbe. And I have an endoscope, so when I'm looking at instruments, I never presume I know what I'm going to find. I just have a little look around in places to see what I may see. And this is the sympathetic string tunnel. So again, if Rachel can show us this is a gap underneath the fingerboard, so where your hand will play, there's actually a little tunnel where all those strings go through. And so this is the original version of this instrument, and there's nothing that interesting there, to be honest. I can see what chord it is, I can see that it's very rough, but they haven't polished it and made it perfect, it's just been rough to the left. However, when I'd done this with the instrument in Prague, I saw text, and it was in Czech, and I'm in Prague, so how convenient. I called over the curator and asked him if he knew anything about this, and worth mentioning is no one had spotted this before, not even the curator of the museum, so it's quite exciting. Yeah, the museum didn't know of its existence. Here's the translation. So it's Jan Kulik, or however you pronounce that, maker of musical instruments. Highly likely this was a fingerboard extension label. So as the periods changed and what was fashionable and what people liked on their instruments changed, fingerboards got longer. So highly likely this is a repair label from Jan. But the thing that's really important and very interesting in this is the year. It's 1860. So 133 years after the violet was made, it was still being used. So the snippet earlier I was saying about 1720 and 1730, that's when the instrument was in its prime, and then we presume, oh, they died out and no one used them afterwards. 133 years later, it was still being used. So, to conclude, all the viola Damore players I've shown this instrument to have been quite curious to play it and thrilled at the prospect of trying it, and have been surprised by the weight, so it's actually quite light, like the original. And the easy playability, because it obviously looks quite intimidating. In its life of just over 3 months, it's been played by, in its life of just over a month, it's been played by 4 players in 3 different countries. And yeah, all of them so far seem to have enjoyed it. So it's my conviction that a lot of viola players and viola Damore players and musicians simply don't know these instruments are an option and that they exist. So it's my wish to try and bring them back into the world a little bit. So to grant my wish, Rachel is going to play for us in a moment. We're going to have questions after each piece that Rachel plays. So while she plays, you can have a little think if you have anything to say. If not, no stress.
Yes, there's a relationship between this instrument and baritone. This baritone has sympathetic strings, but they're actually plucked.
I'll answer that after Rachel plays first. So, thanks so much. And yeah, the light back on this, I did, and I just recently found a really interesting thing that I should say for another talk, but I'll say afterwards. Cool. We've got 2 pieces and 2 questions. So yeah, thanks so much to Rachel for being here, and thanks everyone for coming, by the way. So yeah, thanks again.
So my conundrum then was what I was going to play today, because I didn't know what repertoire this instrument was. I just assumed that it would relate to the repertoire as I know for the Viola Damore. In fact, he's obviously its closest relative. And I wanted to play something 17th century because that's when the instrument would have originated. And there isn't anything unaccompanied from the 17th century repertoire for Viola Damore. So I've put together some of the dances from Playford's country dancing master into a kind of little medley. And part of the reason I wanted to do this is because what really surprised me about this instrument, Sam has said how light it is surprising, but the other thing that surprised me is how fast the response is. I thought, look at this enormous great thing, you're going to have to play lumbering slow pieces on it, but nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, you can play very fast on it. So I've chosen Duke of York's March, Green Stockings, the Cobbler's Jig, the Lord Foppington, and finally Lillibolero.
Thank you.